Welcome back to 2023 in Review Part 2. The first thing I want to say is huge thanks to everybody who showed such huge support on the first half of this video. But in Part 2, we're going to cover from July to December, as well as what I expect for the future of Rise of Kingdoms in 2024. But before we get started, I want you to go down to the comment section and comment what your favorite video of 2023 was. But without further ado, let's get started. First, let's talk about July. July had a lot going on with Rise of Kingdoms, the most notable thing being the official release of Grease and Pyrrhus coming to the game. While Pyrrhus wasn't necessarily the most game-breaking commander, he did make a little bit of noise on his release, and the Grease civilization is still very much in the thick of the conversation of the best possible infantry civilizations in Rise of Kingdoms. And I imagine, due to the stats we do get from the Greece civilization, that will continue to be the case for quite some time. Overall, when you're looking at the stats of 5% infantry health, which is insanely useful, rally damage 5%, which is on par with the Ottomans, which were considered one of the top overall rally damage with the skill damage, and Arabia's overall rally damage of 5%. You got a really great potential for your rallies. And then the stone gathering speed is less exciting to get to talk about, but the first two things are just so ridiculously good that you do have Greece in the conversation as the best civilization for infantry overall. And this really brought a lot of noise to the infantry civilizations, which is impressive considering you've got the likes of the Vikings, you've got the likes of Japan, which is weak for infantry civs and is still ridiculously strong. And you've just got so many options. So for there to be a lot of noise made by Greece, it really shows how strong the civilization is. Next, we're going to talk about the milestones. And the biggest milestone that I still am really excited about is hitting a year of the channel being open. On July 17th, we hit a year of channel uploads. And this was with daily uploads as well. So we are talking about what is essentially 365 uploads in 365 days, which was no easy task, but I am so thankful to have the people around me that helped support me with video ideas and support the channel with outreach. So thank you for helping me reach that milestone. The other things that I want to talk about are the videos I released in July and some of my favorites. The first one was the budget build series, which were epic and below equipment pieces that you can build to be relevant in the field, which I thought was great. It's super free to play friendly, and you get a lot of value for not a lot of investment, which helps even the playing field a lot. And I did one for each troop type, so it was exciting to do that. Next, I got to do the first real pairing report card, which was Joe Nevsky. So that'll also be featured in the playlist in the description, as well as on the channel if you want to find it. The other one I got to do, which was really fun for me because the other major thing was talking about Siege of Orleans, was we got to jump right into Siege of Orleans. So I got to actually make videos on auxiliary skills, and I got to talk about the craziest garrison auxiliary skills I could think of, which was awesome being a garrison player and having the buildup of garrison commanders. It really gave a lot of creativity and just making people aware of some things that they might not realize could be super strong. Most notably, Caesar was a great one with his passive skill. And I'll also leave that there in the playlist in the description. Next, we are on to August. And the biggest thing that happened in August, of course, was the release of Woe and Justinian, who are both major players in the meta, whether you're talking about field or rally, and are probably going to be there for some time. Justinian is still a staple and I think very underappreciated in the rally meta. And Woe puts out a lot of damage and is very respectable in 1v1s and has to be respected for his sustain. Although my support playstyle doesn't really play into his kit as well, so you won't really see me investing in him anytime soon between the commitment of garrison commander troops and the commitment of supports to my field playstyle. But either way, both of them have been insanely impactful in the meta, and you'll probably see a lot of them running around for quite some time. For August videos, I got to talk a lot about just some general things, and some of the general things I got to cover that I haven't really gotten to cover in prior videos, and getting to loop back around to that. The 3 videos that I enjoyed most making in August were talking about set bonus goals for garrison sets. So if you're building an infantry garrison, here's how many of the Eternal Empire set. Or if you're building cavalry, how much of the Wasteland, how much of the Dragon's Breath if you're building archers, to get what's considered good value versus trying to diversify into your Season of Conquest legendaries or the easier to acquire legendaries if you're looking to get good value. So that was kind of fun to talk about. Talking about the balance where the Wheel and the Mightiest Governor do really balance themselves out very well. When you're talking about short term, you want a lot of people to have access to a commander, then you want them on the Wheel. Whereas if you want a few select people, like rallying garrison leaders, to have access to a commander to build them quickly, the Mightiest Governor gives a chance to get a lot of heads very quickly. So it makes a unique balance, and it's part of, I think, why the game has the longevity that it does. Because somebody could pick up rallies, and within a couple weeks, if they have some heads on hand, can quickly get them expertised if they want to step up for the kingdom. And it helps fill those gaps that players who are leaving the game or just coming back to the game can either be replaced or replace somebody who has been gone, or to catch back up to speed much more quickly. The last video I want to talk about is just different equipment approaches versus going into all your legendaries on one set as quickly as possible versus gradually building up, and why that differs from field to rally. Because a lot of the talk comes to rallies and garrisons, and a lot of the talk is if that is the only playstyle. And in reality, as we all know, field doesn't necessarily have that. And if you have a couple purples in your field set, it might hurt your trade a little bit. But I think a lot of times players get discouraged from field fighting altogether when they don't have all legendaries, when in reality, it might be suboptimal, but you're still better off in the field trying to help your team. So I thought it was a cool way to reach out to players and make them know that even if your equipment isn't perfect, even if your setup isn't perfect, you can make an impact. Next, we are on to August. And the biggest thing that happened in August, of course, was the release of Huo and Justinian, who are both major players in the meta, whether you're talking about field or rally, and are probably going to be there for some time. Justinian is still a staple and I think very underappreciated in the rally meta. And Huo puts out a lot of damage and is very respectable in 1v1s and has to be respected for his sustain. Although my support playstyle doesn't really play into his kit as well, so you won't really see me investing in him anytime soon between the commitment of garrison commander troops and the commitment of supports to my field playstyle. But either way, both of them have been insanely impactful in the meta, and you'll probably see a lot of them running around for quite some time. For August videos, I got to talk a lot about just some general things, and some of the general things I got to cover that I haven't really gotten to cover in prior videos, and getting to loop back around to that. The 3 videos that I enjoyed most making in August were talking about set bonus goals for garrison sets. So if you're building an infantry garrison, here's how many of the Eternal Empire set. Or if you're building cavalry, how much of the Wasteland, how much of the Dragon's Breath if you're building archers, to get what's considered good value versus trying to diversify into your Season of Conquest legendaries or the easier to acquire legendaries if you're looking to get good value. So that was kind of fun to talk about. Talking about the balance where the Wheel and the Mightiest Governor do really balance themselves out very well. When you're talking about short term, you want a lot of people to have access to a commander, then you want them on the Wheel. Whereas if you want a few select people, like rallying garrison leaders, to have access to a commander to build them quickly, the Mightiest Governor gives a chance to get a lot of heads very quickly. So it makes a unique balance, and it's part of, I think, why the game has the longevity that it does. Because somebody could pick up rallies, and within a couple weeks, if they have some heads on hand, can quickly get them expertised if they want to step up for the kingdom. And it helps fill those gaps that players who are leaving the game or just coming back to the game can either be replaced or replace somebody who has been gone, or to catch back up to speed much more quickly. The last video I want to talk about is just different equipment approaches versus going into all your legendaries on one set as quickly as possible versus gradually building up, and why that differs from field to rally. Because a lot of the talk comes to rallies and garrisons, and a lot of the talk is if that is the only playstyle. And in reality, as we all know, field doesn't necessarily have that. And if you have a couple purples in your field set, it might hurt your trade a little bit. But I think a lot of times players get discouraged from field fighting altogether when they don't have all legendaries, when in reality, it might be suboptimal, but you're still better off in the field trying to help your team. So I thought it was a cool way to reach out to players and make them know that even if your equipment isn't perfect, even if your setup isn't perfect, you can make an impact. Now we are on to September. And September was a fairly quiet month for Rise of Kingdoms outside of course, the anniversary events, with Rise of Kingdoms hitting 5 years. And that's a huge milestone that I don't mean to understate. But in terms of new commanders, new mechanics, it was a fairly quiet month. And Rise of Kingdoms does benefit from having fairly quiet months, because it allows players to catch back up and get up to speed and be ready to go. So it is by no means a bad thing. And the anniversary event gave us a chance to look back at how much different the game's been, and I got to reflect on that a little bit personally, and it's helped inspire some of my content. And it's been great to kind of think about when I started playing well over 4 years ago now. It is a completely different game than it was it is now. And even if you go down to the way marches are built or the way something is lined up, it is completely night and day. So it is cool to look back and see that. Some of the videos I got to talk about, and really more about the new mechanics because there's just so many of them, were whether you need to build new or refine equipment. And that's a big thing that I think people have debates on. Do you build your second legendary set and hope you get the expertise? Or do you refine the one you have and try to get one really good set? And it really comes down to personal choice. And that's the great part of the game, is that at the end of the day, there's no wholly right or wholly wrong answer when it comes to certain things, and equipment's one of them. While one piece might be better, whether you want to try to roll the dice and get an expertise on a brand new equipment and get 2 for 1, or try to roll the refine and maybe get it 2, it's all a game of chance, and you're playing a numbers game, but ultimately it's a little bit of luck. The other videos I got to make were talking about field auxiliary skills, very much like with Siege of Orleans. There's so many different skills that might be underrated or underappreciated. Saladin's skill is a very, very good example of that when you talk about a commander that has underrated skills, because he just has what is straight up a 30% skill damage reduction and a 20% counterattack damage reduction. That's not for cavalry, it's for everyone. So it is such an underappreciated skill, and I think it's something that like some people might overglance, and being able to create that ability for players to augment and to have their own agency of finding a way to make themselves stronger through what they have available. And that was just, it's cool to be able to talk about those, of course. And lastly, talking about commander concepts I would love to see implemented was another short I got to do, and just talk about where Rise of Kingdoms could get. And I would love to see how many of these I'm right, and I might revisit this in 6 months or so and see which ones were right, which ones were wrong, which ones are still in the cards potentially. So it'd be cool to see that. And of course, the biggest video of September was one of my favorite videos I've ever made, revisited, and that was should you build a garrison in Rise of Kingdoms? Of course, you know I'm going to say yes because I am a garrison main, but at the same time, it was cool to be able to talk about why you should build a garrison, why it's helpful for your kingdom, even if you're just a temporary filler or you're just temporarily helping, and what you should build at the moment. And I am very much looking forward to, of course, revisiting this as the meta continues to change and shift. And it's one of my favorite video formats to visit because of that. But overall, those were the 4 favorite videos I had, and I couldn't keep it down to 3 because there's just too many videos I really enjoyed making in September. Now we are on to October. And October was a very interesting month because we got a lot of leaks about Gorga and Liu Che, and we were going to get them, and we're going to get them. And it took till the end of October, start of November, for Gorgo to officially reach the game. And of course, the wait is well worth it because she is definitely a major player in the garrison meta. But it was interesting to see Lilith not rush a commander out. And I've noticed even now with the newest commanders of Asher and Herman, that they're not in a hurry to get them out. And before it was a leak, and then 2 weeks later you'd have the commander out. Now it's 4 to 6 weeks, and there's a lot more consideration going into the commander. And Gorgo is by no means completely broken, but she does have a lot of skills that have potential to be abused and strengthened, and that's part of where the whole Gorgo Constantine has come into the forefront, where you have a commander who is years old that is all of a sudden to the forefront of relevance because you have Gorgo. And it really shows how, even if you are using a commander that might not be as good now, it may come back to the relevance of the meta, and really the openness of why a garrison or a field player should look and think about what they should do and really try and test. And even if you just use ARC to make some preliminary tests, just try everything that you think might work, because you'll never know what you'll come across. And that's how some of the best or craziest garrison commander combinations come to the forefront. Nevsky comes to mind. Scipio Prime comes to mind. With Flavius, you're talking about Jan and Jadwiga with Nevsky, and Flavius having Scipio Prime. You've even talked about Gorgo being used in the field in some extents. You never know what the results are going to be until you try. So, obviously don't be reckless, but give some things some try, because you'll never know what will work and what won't. Some of the videos that we made in October that I really, really enjoyed were, of course, the passive time to create a legendary equipment piece. I love doing anything that involves math and kind of prediction, and knowing if I just log on every day, I don't waste time, I make sure that these things are running constantly, this is how long it takes for it to pay dividends, is a great way for people to visualize just one, not only how easy it is for something to be acquired, but also how hard it is, and how much time investment a new player has to make, and know that in the end it is worth it, but you're not going to get something overnight. So it's, great for players who are looking to plan, but it's also humbling for players who are learning that maybe they're not going to get the T5 the same night that they start the game. It's going to be a lot longer of a process, in fact. Another one is talking about Season of Conquest gear versus normal legendary gear, which is still, I think, a hot debate amongst people, especially with set bonuses in play. There's a lot of discussion about it. So it's nice to kind of talk about it and break it down quickly in a shorts video and just kind of get my opinion out there and what I'm seeing out there, while also opening it up for people to have their own discussion. A fun video that's been a recommendation of Totus of 2057 here was how to do a 5115 skill, and again using math and statistics to prove that there's a slightly more efficient way to do it if you can get a certain roll to go your way. So it's little things like that where you can just get a little bit of efficiency out of it, or just save yourself a little bit of heartache in the long run, that could really come back around and help you, while you are also just letting your own intelligence and your own thought be able to work for you, instead of just going with the flow, finding a alternative way to potentially gain a leg up on your competition. Of course, the long format video I really enjoyed making was the Should You Build a City Defense in Rise of Kingdoms, which was a request of a subscriber in the comment section of Should You Build a Garrison in Rise of Kingdoms, which was a fun way for me to visit the city defense meta. Even if the disclaimer comes that you should probably avoid getting your city rallied, it's nice that if you are getting rallied, you can quickly throw together the best possible defense to give you the best chance of walking away from that rally. And understanding what rallies you should look for if you want to try to cover multiple bases, or even if you're just trying to look for a defense to stop you from getting swarmed down every single time you go into an arc match. It was cool to kind of cover where city defenses were, where it can differ a little bit from the garrison meta for objectives, and where it's very much the same, which is in most cases. But overall, it was a cool way to split the difference, so to speak. Of course, in October, we also crossed 475 subscribers, which put us just short of that 500 mark, and it was great to see such growth, and it's still crazy to me that the growth has gone as steady and as long as it has, And I'm so thankful for all of you who are listening right now and potentially subscribing in the future for that growth. So very much thank you on that as well. Next, we're on to November. And November was another one of those quiet months in Rise of Kingdoms. You did have the Grand Prix going on. And of course, this was really the first time most people had a chance to really use Gorgo and figure stuff out about her. So you're finding out a lot more information about Gorgo. I got to talk a lot about a bunch of different things. Of course, Gorgo was having her own video, which I had covered in October when the leaks first came out. So we didn't get to talk about Gorgo a lot in this month, just because a lot of the discussion was already covered in the original video. But I did get to talk a lot about some other things that were any number of housekeeping items I hadn't gotten to talk about before. Some of my favorites were, of course, starting the Pairing Pro-Con series, which was really fun, because it gives me a chance to talk about the multiple options a lot of commanders have to pair with, especially for garrisons, to cover different niches. So the one I enjoyed most, of course, was talking about Jan, because you have so much variety, whether you want to use Heraclius, whether you want to use YSS, whether you want to use Jadwiga if you have her available, or whether you want to use Nevsky. You have so many different options that each one has its own little area in which it is best at. So being able to talk about that in a quick, concise format, I think is great for, obviously for me to be able to quickly explain to people, but also for people to be able to understand that there isn't one wholesale solution at Garrison. Even if there's one really good Garrison, there is going to be a counter to it, whether it's now or the next Commander release, or somewhere in between those Commander releases when a Gorgo Constantine pops up out of nowhere because somebody discovers that's the best thing. There's always going to be a counter. So being able to quickly counter that counter just sets you up for success. And it's part of the dance of garrisons versus rallies, and part of the major fighting that garrisons and rallies do with each other is trying to gain a leg up on each other. So that was a fun one to talk about. Of course, talking about what each troop type tends to excel at, because even if we have infantry that runs rallies, typically each troop type is best suited to one specific role, and whether that role is defensive, offensive, mobility based, every commander in some way or another, even if you have a commander like Jan who isn't suited to the field, most cavalry commanders tend to be more suited to the field than maybe infantry commanders who tend to be better at garrisons. So talking about where each niche is traditionally good at helps contextualize where these other commanders, when you have a Jan come out, just how significant having Jan as a commander is when you have a field commander set of cavalry that now also has the option to build into garrisons and help defend. And that creates variety, because now the infantry rallies, it have to be infantry rallies to counteract that. And then archer defenses to counteract the city rallies. And then cav rallies become relevant. And then, of course, infantry defenses to counter the cav rallies. And it just helps build the strategic depth of the game. The city positioning guide was another video I really enjoyed. I think it's a very underappreciated portion of the game, because there is so much you can accomplish by positioning well. And even if you are 20 million power, positioning well helps your team. If nothing else, it prevents you from hurting your team by taking up that spot. So it's definitely something that I think needs to be talked about more often and is really underappreciated in that regard. Of course, one of the other videos I got to talk about, because it was Thanksgiving, was the commanders I'm most thankful for. And of course, I got to talk a lot about Jan, got to talk a lot about Heraclius. I got to talk a lot about garrisons, because garrisons really keep the game flowing. And of course, me being a garrison main, I'm very thankful for having the ones that I do. Some channel milestones we hit. Of course, November was when we hit 500 subscribers. So that was, of course, a very exciting time for the channel. Very awesome and humbling for me to be able to look up at a YouTube Studio app and see 500 there at the top of the page. It really brings into context just how many people are here watching my videos, and hoping that I'm being a positive influence on all those people and helping guide them in the right direction. So it was an awesome thing to see. And right before Thanksgiving, it really kind of brought everything together perfectly. Lastly, we're on to December. The biggest news in December, of course, was Herman and Asher being leaked, and both of them finally getting released into the game right at the end of December, right before New Year's. Of course, you can't get both of them right this second. You can get Herman now, but you're going to have to wait till the day after, or the reset after this video posts. Of course, when Sunday reset happens for Asher to officially hit the game. But now you have concrete numbers to work off of, and really some ways to contextualize where they're going to fall in the meta and in the game. So, of course, we're going to be having some Herman videos and Asher videos following here in the next couple weeks. But both of them are definitely going to have their own niches in the meta. And now, no more speculation. You have concrete numbers to work off of. So testing, of course, is going to be continuing all the way into January as we figure out what Herman and Asher exactly are. Some of the videos I got to talk about in December that I really enjoyed were, of course, how buffs and debuffs can create a snowball effect. As a big fan and proponent of people building more supports, of course, I'd love to talk about why they're really underappreciated. And this is a good part of it, is why a debuff or a buff can increase the trade value, which then makes the successive turn of trades even better because you have generated an advantage, which then becomes a bigger advantage, and eventually snowballs into a level where you don't necessarily realize that that 30% health debuff is completely shattering that defense. So it makes a really, really big jump in the trade that I think a lot of people don't necessarily see on paper. And it's part of why certain commanders like Scipio Prime have such longevity in the meta. Other videos I got to talk about was 3 things you should be doing every day in Rise of Kingdoms, which is a very frequent request for subscribers who comment, is talk about things that they should be doing. And what not better than the things you should be doing every day, because if you're getting those things accomplished every day, you're getting more consistent resource intake, you're getting more consistent development and growth, and it's going to get you to the finish line sooner if you're trying to build up to T4 or T5. Of course, the Pairing Pro Con series continued, so I got to talk about, of course, Zenobia's Pairing Pro Con, which I thought was really fun to talk about, especially with the release of Gorgo. It really has brought Zenobia back into the middle of the meta, whereas Jan and Dido had kind of pushed her out of the meta as like a B+ to B Garrison. Now that Gorgo is here, Xeno Gorgo is almost like a Gorgo Constantine level where it's very tanky with a lot of white damage to resist Swarm, while also making it extremely painful for the enemy. So you essentially have pulled a commander who many people were thought was going to the down and out back into the forefront all of a sudden. So it's always cool to see that happen, especially for garrisons. And Theodora had a couple second wins like that, and YSS has seemingly infinite number of them. So it's always cool to see when that happens, and got to encompass that in a video, of course. Now that we've covered what happened in 2023, let's talk about what I want to see in 2024. The biggest thing I want to see, I think the last couple months they've done a great job of it, is Lilith giving more agency to the players to create their own play styles and their own play strategies. Siege of Orleans was a perfect example of this, where you could create your own set of support skills instead of depending on Heroic Anthem throwing you 1 or 2 bones that might be useful if you have the commanders. Instead, you could take what you have and make it useful. Whether you have a Theodora that's gathering dust on the shelf that now all of a sudden you've got a Ring of Doom on whatever garrison you want. Whether you have a Saladin that has been gathering dust because he gets swarmed so easily and pops like a balloon, that's now making your Joan Prime Nevsky an absolute tank with that skill damage reduction. Whether you have a rally that is now dealing a bunch of extra damage because of any number of other rally commander skills. Really, the choice is yours. And whether you've been playing for 1,500 days or 50, you have some agency in that. And while it might not be significant for the 20 million power player, the player who's in the 40 million range or the 50 million range, or is intentionally staying as T4, or is even been playing for a couple years and may have T5 but doesn't really play heavily as a free-to-play. Every investment then can be utilized, and it gives the players the ability to determine their own strategies. And that, of course, breeds more creativity. It breathes more enthusiasm into the game for players to actually want to figure these things out. Next, I would also love to see more gaps between commander releases. Again, Lilith has already started to do this, it seems like, with Gorgo being delayed and now Herman and Asher being delayed until, well, the making of this video to be released. It really seems like they're starting to space the commanders back out, and I hope this continues to be the case. Because even if you are a whale or if you spend a lot, there is so much gap to make up, and especially if they're going to keep putting out KvKs, where agency comes into play and any number of creative combinations come into play. Being able to go back and maybe get a couple more skill ranks in a commander that you weren't going to invest in, to, if nothing else, to give yourself a better support skill, or to give yourself a better alternative option for a second March pairing, and be able to just breathe some life back into these commanders who aren't necessarily A+, but are Bs, or even like high C level garrisons or rallies or field marches, to have additional coverages and to cover more situations. You never know when somebody's going to uncover the next Gorgo Constantine doing this. So it helps, again, breathe longevity into the game, which I think is a huge part of what can keep Rise of Kingdoms around for quite some time to come. So I would love to see that implemented more and more, and to just give the players more ways to create unique playstyles. Of course, I would also like to see some more civilizations. There's so many civilizations you can cover in Rise of Kingdoms, so why not add a few more? Maybe add another cavalry civilization, because we've gotten a couple infantry and a couple archers. And the Byzantines were an expansion civilization, but that was several years ago, so it might be nice to see them revisit cavalry, maybe bring the Mongols in, or bring any number of different commanders to breathe some relevance back into the game, and to breathe more stories to tell. Because part of the fun of Rise of Kingdoms is seeing these commanders who are historical commanders interacting with one another, even if it's on a battlefield. Being able to touch that history and know that these characters are essentially living, breathing people at one point, and they have their own stories, and being able to connect that story to the gameplay is part of what makes the game so fun. So being able to add another civilization and tell another story in another frame of reference is just great. And it's shown time and time again between the Vikings and Egypt, and most recently Greece, that this is great for players, it's great for engagement, and it's just great for the game in general, because there's so much more to get excited about. But with that, we'll wrap up our 2023 in review. I'm hoping that 2024 is another year with so many more things to get excited about, because there's so much to talk about, and I'm looking forward to so much more to talk about. But if you wanted to hear some other subject covered that maybe I missed in 2023, let me know in the comments. If you haven't already, like I said in the introduction, go down in the comments and let me know what your favorite video of 2023 was, because it helps me decide what future content's going to be like, and I would love to make content that you all enjoy, and would love to make more content of the specific video topics that you enjoy, so let me know down there as well. And as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield in 2024.